Hey guys, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about John chapter 8 through 12. And as some of you may know, John is my favorite in the Bible, just completely. And not only that, but chapter 8 is my favorite story in the Bible. Um, but I'm not going to go in depth with a lot of it. I'm just going to kind of share some things that stand out to me, some things that I think are great takeaways, but I want you to read it all for yourself because everything that's in there is in there for a reason, and the things that stand out to me aren't necessarily going to be the things that stand out to you, but maybe something that does stand out to me, you'll envision it in a different way. So I'm just going to kind of dig into it a little bit. It's not going to be super long, but in John chapter 8, what we see is the adulteress story, which is absolutely my favorite story in the whole Bible, because when I first became a Christian, this is the first, John was the first book that I read, but this story stood out to me like beyond anything that I can even tell you. Um, so this woman is caught in the act of adultery, and she's taken into town, and they basically want Jesus to tell them, hey, stone her because this sin is not accepted here. But instead, Jesus starts drawing in the dirt, and he's just basically ignoring them. And they keep prying at Jesus. They keep trying to get some kind of answer out of him. And so finally he just says, hey, any of you that are sinless, go ahead and cast the first stone. And the reason that stands out so much to me, and especially as a new Christian, why it stood out so much to me, is because that just goes to show, what? All of us have sin in our life. We're born into sin, but all of us have something. And more so than that, one thing that really stood out to me is, what? My sin, like whatever it is no better, no worse than the next person's. So, everyone wants to kind of categorize sin, but it's not like that at all. If I cheated on a test, it would be just as bad as someone murdering someone because all sins are equal. And so that was one thing that just completely, I guess, was amazing to me, is that that's just something that I took away from that is, none of us are better than anyone else. And that's why Jesus said, hey, if you're sinless, go ahead and do this, because I know for a fact you're not. And I know that you're not going to be able to do this to this woman. And just, her reaction, she was expecting to get stoned. But then when she didn't, Jesus is like, hey, go away from here and sin no more. Just an incredible response, because they were just trying so hard to just get at him, and he didn't allow it. He was just honest and brutal with them, and they came to realize hey, this is real. We aren't sinless. We don't have the right to cast this first stone. So then in chapter 9, we hear about the blind man who was born blind, and Jesus he makes this clay and then puts it over his eyes, and then he can see. And the disciples kind of, when they first get to him and realize he's blind, they're like, hey, who's to blame for this? Who's to blame for this guy being blind? Is it because he sinned, or is it because his parents sinned? Or what exactly is the point of this? And, Jesus doesn't say, hey, his parents were to blame for this. They did this awful thing, and so now their son is blind. No, instead he says, instead of trying to blame someone, why don't you see what God can do with it? And so, this guy came to just believe in God and the miracles that he could do, and he was getting other people to believe in him because of the miracle that he had performed. And that was the thing, is a lot of people then, they wanted to see it. They wouldn't just let it go. They had to know, hey, he can do this. So one of the best things I think that stood out to me is when Jesus says that, let's see what God can do with it. Because there's so many times, people, we think something's wrong with someone, and we're like, well, or something's wrong with us, and we're like, well, who's to blame for this happening? And then we realize, hey, God can do something with it. So then we see in chapter 11, Lazarus' death. We've talked about this a lot, I know, in youth group. And so Mary and Martha are blaming Jesus for their brother dying. They're saying, hey, if you were here, you could have stopped this. But you know what? Jesus loved him so much that he actually wept because he loved Lazarus so much, and is like, why don't you wait and see, because he ended up raising Lazarus from the dead. And so it was one of those things, it's not because he didn't love him. It's not because he wasn't there. It's not because of anything. Jesus knew what he was doing, and you know what? He had to show these people, I'm capable of this. I love this man, and I will bring him back. And, instead of blaming me, why don't you just wait and see, like, what can come out of this? And all these people, were shocked. I mean, it was a crazy miracle to see someone, dead for 4 days and then raised back to life. So that's just some of the big takeaways that I had from this. And I hope maybe that you have other ones. And maybe you can share them with us on youth group. You can write about them on here. But I truly hope that you read this, because these chapters that I just went over are some of the biggest chapters in John. I mean, obviously, there's way more to come, but there's just so much that happens in these chapters, and I don't want you guys to miss out on that. I want you guys to read it and see what you take away, and don't just listen to me and see what I take away and be like, oh yeah, like, that's good. Because maybe none of the things that I said even, like, empathizes with you at all, but I hope that there is something that you take away from it. So go ahead and read it, guys.